One reason why I don't go into restaurants actually is because, and even in France, they use the seed oils, which are so ubiquitous. And by seed oils, I mean, canola, safflower, sunflower,
The
cottonseed.
hateful eight, as Dr. Kate calls them.
Yes, yes, absolutely. She
Corn,
she
canola,
has,
soybean, sunflower. Hey, we got four
yeah.
or five of them. You know the drill, people. And I think Tania Teschke, we connect
Hi.
again. It's been a while. We've had some great interviews in the past, especially on the occasion of one of the best books ever written and published by Primal Blueprint Publishing, Bordeaux Kitchen. Just the most incredible masterpiece that I know you put your heart and soul into, your life's work, and then one day it comes out in a giant hardcover size, 600 and something pages, I think cut down from whatever it was, 1,000 pages. But why don't we start there and you can tell us about the book and how the whole journey's gone from writing it and then having it be a bestseller for so many years. We're quite a few years into the publication, but it's still high in demand.
Well, Brad, thanks for having me, and you've always been the my biggest supporter. So thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a few years, and it came out in June 2018, and the Bordeaux Kitchen, and it's about ancestral French traditions around wine and food. So that's kind of it's been a popular topic actually. People love everybody loves French cuisine for some reason, and it's really good. And so I just continued practicing it and learning it. And I'm actually working on a second book now. I don't know if I've told you that before, on organ meats, because the first book, when I was living in Bordeaux and learning about all their traditions, the food and the wine, lifestyle and culture, I learned about how important animal products are in the French traditional diet, and really in most diets around the world, and in particular organ meats, which are the most nutrient dense, uh, you know, parts of the animal, really, and most nutrient dense foods we can eat. In my opinion. So I have a great chapter in the book, which on organ meats, and then the rest of the book is divided by, animals and meat, so veal and pork and lamb, etc. Um, and that organ meats chapter is really a pride and joy of mine. And so I wanted to build out on that. And so I just continue to, visit my friends in France and take pictures of the food we're cooking and note the recipes. And so I'm working on just kind of, I'm on a continuum, and I keep on going with this idea that, French traditional cuisine is really good for us. Even though people say, there's that French paradox, right? And I would say it's not despite the fact that they eat, um, you know, goose fat and all the delicious rich foods, but it's because of it that the French are so healthy and slim, and traditionally at least.
Yeah,
Um,
what idiot named it a paradox? And maybe you can tell the listeners, viewers, what that whole concept is, because it's so laughable now, especially as more and more research, confirms that eating nutritious natural fats is actually a good thing for your body, and we're unwinding all that programming from decades of fat being the enemy and all that. But this French paradox concept.
yeah, the French paradox was purported, it's sort of put forth in I think in the early 90s or in the 80s, by a French researcher that he was doing a lot of research, especially on the people in the southwest of France, which includes Bordeaux and Toulouse and other cities. Um, excuse me. And he found that people in France on the whole, and especially in the Southwest, where they were eating a lot of duck fat and goose fat, had had lower rates of cardiovascular disease. And whereas in other parts of the world, like the U.S., People weren't eating as richly, but there was high heart disease in across the population, and so because everyone believed that fat makes you fat, or at least animal fats make you fat, it was a paradox. It was paradoxical. To why would the French be so slim, be able to seem so healthy, and so that became kind of the French paradox, and people look to the French. Wow, they seem so healthy, but they're eating the richest food on the planet. How can that be? So that's why I say it's because they're eating those rich foods, which is changing now, though, because people are kind of more hurried in their jobs. Modern life sort of takes over, and they don't have as much time to sit around the table with friends and family over a bottle of wine. Or even the idea or the tradition of going to the butcher shop or the market. Your time gets kind of pinched, and so you tend to go less frequently. Butcher shops are closed, and
you go to the super big box store that's,
yeah.
I'm sure, invaded France and other countries where it used to be the local bakery, the local vegetable market, and so forth.
Yeah, the supermarché is pretty much
supermarché.
Yeah, is ubiquitous, and they're good for certain purposes to pick up something quick. But the beauty of the French lifestyle, which everyone really dreams of when they want to go to France and experience this, is the outdoor markets, or they're covered markets, but you have individual vendors, neighbors talking to each other. They're outdoors, or at least they're biking or walking to the markets. And they're traditionally in France and in many countries, many European countries, at least, there's, the butcher shop, the charcutier, the boulangerie, so where you can get all the different things that you want to create your next meal or series of meals. And it's just a part of the wonderful French lifestyle, this movement and outdoors and fresh food, right? Fresh, they have small refrigerators there too, unlike in the US, for example, where we have these big things, in the big box stores, you buy everything for a week or a month and don't have to go back. Whereas there, the fridges are small, still are small in general, excuse me, and you buy for the next day or, for that day. And so there are all these kind of lifestyle things that they are changing now, though. However, like I said, people are kind of, modern life.
The big fridges are going to come in and take over the market.
Yeah.
The small fridge, another paradox. Gee, how can they be so healthy when they can't fit that much in their fridge? Yeah. What's cruel is when you tell these stories, I want to remind the listeners, viewers, like this is how you presented that book too. And so, so many cookbooks are out there with paleo recipes, and that's great. And you have so many cool ideas, but like your book was a journey through French culture and the whole wine piece that came in, and then the chapter dedicated to organs that you're talking about. It's an interesting thing that you mentioned because, right, all traditional cultures have organ foods as a centerpiece. And if we want to go back further to evolutionary biology, it is known and undisputed that the Homo sapiens gaining access to more nutrient-dense foods in the form of the big game that they took down or the marine life that they were able to harvest, that is why we evolved to the top of the food chain with larger brains and, completely went on a separate branch of the tree from our ape cousins who, if you want to look around at the gorillas today, I believe they spend like 11 hours a day eating roots, shoots, and leaves to get what little nutrition they can extract for their very small brains to survive and, honor their species. So here we are with, I guess, recent decades of cultural programming and propaganda where we've widely disrespected or forgotten about the cultural traditions. And we see I think it's our generation, Tania, where, our parents still had a tiny little connection left over to their ancestral past and cooking traditions. And my mother and father both, nondescript, just sort of, I guess you call it WASP, descending from British and Ireland and whatever, ancestry. But my mom would
Mm.
relate that, one of her centerpiece meals when she was growing up was liver and onions.
Mm.
And everybody who's got some touch to their cultural past can reference the same thing. The Mexican cooking that we still eat prevalently in my wife's family, they're going to the Mexican markets and getting all these different parts of the animal to make their pozole or menudo and all these things. And then I guess it's the cultural influence that swooped in, especially in USA and the culture that we export, where we just went to fast food. There was a great book, Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser. I'm sure you're aware of it, but he talks about how our culture changed with the advent of fast food restaurants, and we disregarded all these things, just like you're describing in France today, where they're getting leaked in with corporate interests and supermarchés and closing down the poor neighborhood boulangerie.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And you touched on the liver and onions. That's yeah, I mean, even in the US, I think in the restaurants, 100 or more years ago, that was a standard. Liver and onions or calves liver and onions was a standard uh, plate, or thing to order on the menu. And it's rare or non-existent unless you now today. I mean, I try to go to French restaurants if I go out. I don't go out very much. Um,
How can they
Partly,
meet your standard? I mean, here comes this lady coming into the restaurant. May I see the menu, please? Oh,
yeah.
no.
Well, so I try for French restaurants, and they'll often have something sweetbreads,
Mm.
which is like the thymus gland, or they'll have liver. But actually, I find that so many restaurants, even in France, are hard pressed to offer organ meats, because there's a lack of knowledge about it now, less and less. It's something the grandmother made, and people are they're hesitant, and unfamiliar, and think, oh, the texture is yucky, and they're just not used to it like they were 100 years ago, let's say, or even 50 years ago. Yeah. Um, and so one reason why I don't go into restaurants actually is because, and even in France, they use the seed oils, which are so ubiquitous. And by seed oils, I mean, canola, safflower, sunflower, um,
The
cottonseed.
hateful eight, as Dr. Kate calls them.
Yes, yes, absolutely. She
Corn,
she
canola,
has,
soybean, sunflower. Hey, we got four
yeah,
or five of them. You know the drill, people. And I think cooking with them in a bottle is obviously an important change to make right away. But if you examine labels, you'll see that these seed oils are used in just all manner of packaged, processed, frozen treats and goodies and snacks. They're just, like you said, ubiquitous. And some research says that they're 20 to 40% of all caloric intake by Western
yeah,
diet.
yeah. I mean, they're cheap too, and because well, I'm not really sure why this has happened over time, but there's less demand for it, less interest, less commonality, or the common everydayness about, let's say, organ meats and using animal fats. And we've been told around the world, at least in the first world, right, that the animal fats, saturated fats, are bad for you. So here we have this wonderful machine-made, corn oil for you to use. And of course, as Dr. Kate Shanahan says, these are inflammatory and cause oxidative stress. But anyway, people have become so used to shunning animal products and animal fats that they don't even know how to use them in cooking. And I'll tell you one little story. I did a year or two ago. I did some recipes with a French chef, up and coming young guy, and really, really excellent chef, multiple stars, multiple restaurants. And we were cooking some organ meats, and we started, with the kidney, a kidney recipe. And for the kidneys, so beef kidney or veal kidney comes in a nice, beautiful encasing of suet, which is the fat, sort of the visceral fat around this organ. And it's it's sort of the most high quality, pure fat. And you can use that you can render it, which just means melt it, heat it, and it becomes liquid, the fat. There are some solids that remain behind, called cracklings. But if you melt that fat, you can use it for cooking. But there are several steps in doing that. And he wanted to just use his plastic bottle of sunflower oil or whatever it was.
The
I mean,
five-star chef. Oh my gosh, how heartbreaking.
I was shocked. And so I told him, no, for my recipes, for my new book and the old book, but we were doing for the next book on organ meats, we need to use this tallow, this suet. And so he said, okay, we threw it in the pot and, let the fat just kind of simmer to melt into an oil, which we could use for cooking. But even really good chefs, they know how to work with it. They're very highly skilled, but it's the restaurant, they tend to not, it adds to the cost. And also, it's another step, right? You have to melt it. And it's not as ubiquitous. It's easy to squeeze out the right amount from a bottle, etc. So it's just too easy to use the seed oils. And they're also, they can like they say they can take high temperatures. They're odorless. They're tasteless. But of course, they've been fabricated to be that way.
Imagine that. Yeah. They're
Yeah,
perfect for all manner of use because they don't taste and they don't smell.
yeah.
Because they've been burnt to the crisp with chemical
Deep fried.
solvents and high
Oh,
temperatures. No joke, people. This is why one of the reasons why they're so bad is that instability and the damage that's occurred to extract an oil out of the products that we listed that aren't naturally yielding oils, right? Corn, soybean, things like that, whereby the healthy oils like olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, for three to mention, these are natural plants that are high in fat. And so to extract the oil is no trouble. That's why on the olive oil bottle, it says first cold pressed for the highest quality. That means they just squeeze the olive and the oil comes out without having to heat it, treat it, and manipulate it with chemicals.
that's right. That's right.
So you said something earlier. You qualified your compliments of organ meats as, in your opinion, the most nutritious foods. And I want to zero in on this for a moment because it seems to be undisputed from a biochemical perspective. If you put the food under the microscope and you did a nutrient analysis on a slice of liver, there's nothing that compares. And they have cool charts you can Google kale versus liver, and they go down the list of all the micronutrients, and liver blows the kale out of the water, which is the touted superfood of the plant community. By the way, liver doesn't have those anti-nutrients that can cause a lot of problems when people
Right.
consume kale, and the plant defense chemicals get ingested, especially when ingested in raw form and so forth. But could we argue that it's undisputed that the organ meats have a superior nutrient profile to any other food, including the muscle meats by a large margin?
I would say yes, they do. And if you can look in the FDA, forgetting what it's called, it's sort of the FDA's chart for, you can look up a specific food and see the micronutrients and compare one to another. And a lot of paleo-oriented writers have written about this, like Sarah Ballantyne, and where they give you charts, which they got from the research of the FDA. However, I would say for tallow, tallow is kind of blank on the vitamins and minerals. And I don't know if that's because they don't want to test it, or it's not, hasn't been in their interest, or hasn't been demanded to be tested. But you especially liver, but also thymus, for example, has a lot of properties for immunity. What are all those cells? The T cells, the immune cells, all these kind of cofactors and vitamins and nutrients that we're closer to an animal than we are a plant, right? Let's just agree that we're more like a cow than we are, I don't know, a sunflower. So to me, I mean, I find it undisputed, but people will always try to find ways and say, well, look how much there is and how many nutrients there are in broccoli or kale, as you said, but they aren't necessarily bioavailable, which means your body can't necessarily make use of or extract those things from those vitamins from that plant food. Whereas, a lot of the fat soluble vitamins occur in animal products, and they're very easy and bioavailable for us to use. It's just, I think, an evolutionary process. We've been, I mean, and then feast or famine, I mean, in times of famine, maybe rooted around for roots and berries, but in times where, where there was food, it was really the animals that we were eating
Right.
and
Those were
hunting.
the prize. I love Sean Baker's quip, one of the carnivore leaders, and he said, um, Paul Saladino too, they call the
Yeah,
plant kingdom survival foods, and then the
yeah,
game and the
yes.
hunting would be the prize foods that helped us to evolve, like I mentioned. Um, but Sean Baker said, look, if a clan was able to take down a woolly mammoth, we're talking about 3 million calories, which would serve a large group for months and months. You don't think they're going to be out looking for leaves when they're feasting on this amazing kill. And so it is kind of it's a funny quip that I'm sure, a member of the vegan leadership would turn around and have a spicy comment back. But it's sort of something to reflect upon that today, since we have access to whatever we want, there's a strong argument. I have a chart that you helped me consult with that I have on my website, the B-Rad Nutrition Guide, that ranks the most nutritious foods. And it kind of makes sense that you would go and navigate toward things like oily cold water fish, which are, beyond dispute as offering a lot of nutritional benefits. And now you can go to the store and purchase them in a can rather than go out fishing in northern latitudes at the right time in the right place. So it's kind of interesting how everyone's throwing their hat in the ring, advocating for these foods when we can just shortcut to the very best of the best, and like you described, cook with the rendered fats from the animal, which are temperature stable and maybe not the centerpiece of nutrition. Obviously, they're not, but they don't have the objections and the adverse effects of cooking with the chemically produced agents.
Well, you know what I would say about especially tallow, because you can cook, so the animal fats you can cook with are goose fat, duck fat, pork lard, beef or veal tallow fat, and the suet is specifically from around the kidney, as we talked about before. And I think that, I mean, and I've heard from people like Saladino and others that I mean, the animal fats provide more value and more nutrition than we even know right now. Like I said before, the FDA hasn't even really investigated it. Maybe we need to tell them to put in a request, tell us what's in tallow. I mean, we do know because of Saladino and other groups who have tested some of the nutrients in tallow, that there's vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin K2. And these are all nutrients that you wouldn't get. And not just that, but the stearic acid, the fatty acid profile of tallow, for example, it matches, what we need. And even our skin's, fatty acid profile. In Latin, I just learned recently, in Latin, the word for tallow is sebum. And sebum is the oil that our skin makes, the fat. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that it actually, tallow, for example, does have an incredible nutrient profile that it's just light years ahead of any of these sunflower oils, and without the extra effect of the oxidative stress that so I think it's a beneficial. And one more side note is that, so the stearic acid in tallow, for example, it's a large percentage of this particular acid. It's used, if you look at a lot of your skincare products, it'll say stearic acid in there. I don't know if this is something that is industrially made or if it's taken from tallow, but it naturally preserves the skincare items. So we'll get to this, but in tallow products that you can use on the skin, they last a long time because the oxidation process is much, much slower with tallow because of the stearic acid. And apparently it's stearic acid and the other fatty acids, I don't know all the chemistry, but are, good for our bodies and relevant and also understandable. Our bodies recognize these things. Whereas the stuff that was made in a factory, our bodies don't recognize that, so we tuck it away somewhere and it wreaks havoc in the cells and our bodies. So anyway, that's my little take on animal fats.
And getting back to ancestral cuisine, your highlight is France, but again, just about any culture has these wonderful traditions that we can now attempt to bring back in service of our health. And I know what's also funny is one of the major criticisms of eating in an ancestral primal paleo style pattern is that it's very expensive because now we have to go and get grass-fed beef and organic produce and on down the line with people complaining. But then I look at my chart and look at some of the most top-ranked foods in the world, and they're incredibly inexpensive, like ridiculously inexpensive. I went and bought a container of chicken liver yesterday at the co-op, and it was $3 for this huge load of liver. And it's just a fraction of the price of even the most basic muscle meats that we're mostly presented with. And then when I mentioned the oily cold water fish, they're the least expensive fish that you can buy. They're extremely convenient and prevalent in the canned form. And they also happen to be as highly ranked as the most expensive slice that you're going to get at a fine dining.
Yeah. No, that's true. There is that idea that eating nutrient-dense foods is basically, or animal foods is basically eating a big, ribeye steak every night. And ribeyes are expensive. That's true. So there are a few points about that. One is, if you're actually eating very nutrient-dense animal foods, you need smaller quantities. Because if you're cooking in tallow, for example, it's very satiating. And, you add your sufficient amount of salt on that, and you get what you need in just a simple meal of, let's say hamburger meat, ground hamburger. So for example, my sort of routine is I'll have hamburger meat in the morning, probably half a pound, in the form of a patty. And when you cook hamburger, if you get the 20 or 15% fat ground beef, then it renders the fat, actually. As it's heating, you get this extra fat, which you can kind of pour on as a sauce, or you can sort of strain out and put aside in a jar and save for further cooking when you cook your steak, if you cook a steak. But I find that just that alone, and then maybe I'll have half a banana or something like that at breakfast time, or a little half a spoonful of honey, or you know, I don't need the expensive blueberries, or in winter that are supposed to be a summer food. I don't need the farm, or the, what is that called, greenhouse raised asparagus in the winter when it's not spring, and that's extra expensive. I find that a lot of the vegetables anyway are eaten out of season. When you eat them in season, then they're plentiful, and then they're a little less expensive. So I think you have to kind of look at it with the whole picture. What are you spending your money on? If it's the chips and the drinks and and then the very expensive gourmet spices and vegetables, well, you could put some of that budget towards your grass-fed meat and beef, or or other animal products. It's just a matter of shifting the budget. And I would say that you're kind of investing in your health, because if you eat the good stuff on a daily basis rather than go to Chick-fil-A, every day or often, I think you're investing in yourself, and rather than saving some money, which you're going to have to use for doctor bills later on. I mean, a lot of people say that, right?
And now let's pause for a commercial break. This podcast is sponsored by Chick-fil-A, where you can drive in any time of day and get their seed oil laden dead birds that came from mass production. Oh, mercy. Every time I drive by, there's a lineup around the block, and I guess you're getting some instant gratification with their very skilled, chemically enhanced flavorings that will bring you back for more. And also there's that convenience factor. But you've mentioned some important points about enjoying one's life and connecting with one's community, and all the things that we're missing now that you get naturally when you kind of prepare a meal, let's say together as a family, go shopping and interact with the vendors and learn more about where food come from. One of my favorite things to do when I'm visiting my mom in LA is Saturday morning has the greatest farmers market I've ever been to, the Calabasas Farmers Market. Shout out. They can sponsor the show instead of Chick-fil-A. Forget Chick-fil-A. You guys are out. But to form a relationship with these vendors that show up every week. And one lady's making these incredibly amazing cookies and brownies with, the most informed ingredients. And it's still a treat, and it's not going to be my nutritional go-to, nor is the sourdough bread guy around the corner. But I will treat myself to these indulgences because I know they came from the highest quality and the most care and love, and they're delicious. And it's so different than just adding to your shopping cart another pint of Ben and Jerry's, or a heavily processed cookie thing that is just sitting on your shelf all the time at ready access and at your disposal. And you also mentioned that point about feeling truly satiated when you eat a delicious meal. And hopefully a lot of listeners can relate that when you go get a really good meal at a quality restaurant, you do have a different sensation when you get up from the table and walk away, and you feel completely satisfied, but you're not stuffed and uncomfortable as might happen when you're going to the cheap buffet in Las Vegas and just throwing down stuff that they're serving up that's maybe not the highest quality.
Yeah. I went once when we were in France in the early days of our Bordeaux stay, to a Club Med, and it's all you can eat, and the wine is terrible quality, but it's all
you
you
can
can
drink as well.
Yeah, right. All you can drink, so all you can eat, but it brings out the worst, at least in me. So I'd have 2 croissants and at breakfast, and then 2 desserts at lunch, and I just went crazy. So for a brain like mine that's easily attracted to sugar, it's much better to well, to cook yourself and to not have a free for all.
Mm.
It's also, no one throws dinner parties anymore. I've realized I'm, planning a big dinner party for a bunch of girlfriends. And I realized I hadn't seen them since the last time I threw a dinner party, which is a year ago. And I think, that is something that is very, just a wonderful social piece and cultural piece that the French have kept up. And I think we still, we'll go see family and that kind of thing. But as a society, I think, well, everyone appreciates a home cooked meal, right? And then going over to friends and either helping them prepare or bringing something that you made yourself. And there's more to the nutritional value, I think, of food than just, what the charts say and the fact that it's maybe from an artisan, right, at the market, as opposed to the supermarché. And the love and intention that we use to create these meals, it's memorable. It creates a memorable moment in time. And I still remember last year's dinner party, and I think everyone else does too. And it's just there are elements to the food that we lose when we're just running out to grab
Mm.
something.
Yeah, it
Um,
reminds me, I know we have a mutual appreciation for top quality artisan bean to bar dark chocolate. And I remember from my great interview with Sean Ascanozzi, founder of Ascanozzi Chocolate. Oh, look at this. His wrapper's right there within reach if you're watching on the video. But he describes how if you are consuming mainstream big brand chocolate bars, you are for sure supporting child slave labor in Africa because there is no way to get a Hershey bar to the end user for $3 without when you pay a fair price to the farmers. And so when you're looking at the scrutiny of what kind of dark chocolate you like to consume, well, first of all, we're going to go for dark chocolate instead of milk chocolate because it has more nutritional benefits and less sugar. But on the shelves of dark chocolate, there's quite a disparity. You can tell as a hint looking at the ingredient list and looking for cocoa beans as the first ingredient rather than the commodity products that are sold in big barrels from unknown origin where it'll say chocolate, dark chocolate, chocolate liqueur, terms like that, rather than cocoa beans being the first ingredient, meaning that the manufacturer actually roasted the beans, knew where they came from, and so forth. And then the punchline is expect to pay 3 times more for a quality chocolate bar than a commodity bar. So if you're not paying $9 or $10 or $12 for a single bar of dark chocolate, you are supporting this, this crisis that we see in Africa. And if that doesn't hit someone in a level of concern about what food to buy, I don't know what to say, but it kind of hit me pretty hard. And I try to share that with people when
yeah.
we become accustomed to and actually demanding the lowest possible price. That's what the big box stores are all about. And there's more to it than just getting a bargain and stuffing your face with as much food as possible.
Yeah. And traditionally, I was just writing about this yesterday for the new book, that butchers, for example, so our food chain, right, traditionally in France, but also here, was the farmer, livestock raiser, the slaughterhouse, and the butcher, right? And the butcher would then interface with the customer traditionally, right, and sell what he has. And they're all kind of dependent on each other. And so in the past, the butcher would be able to put out the whole. Let's say he got a fresh lamb, and he would be able to put out the lamb kidneys, the lamb heart, all the lamb leg, the French rack, or the ribs that really people love so much. And nowadays, when they eat lamb, they end up eating just the little fillet, right?
Mm.
But he would be able to sell everything. Now the butchers have a problem where only the fillets sell, and maybe now and then a big leg of lamb, because no one has a dinner party anymore, right? So um, so we can create a better supply chain, I guess you could call it, by our demand of eating the whole range of what's available. And you kind of follow the butcher's cue. If he has a lot of a certain kind of meat, he'll lower the price a bit, and then you do him a favor by or her by buying what's available in that moment. And meat, as you know, and especially organ meats, they tend to degrade quickly, so you want to move that stuff, especially organ meats. They need to be quite fresh. And so to me, that's just we actually have more if we're intentional about our consumption too of animal products. You're helping, and you can ask the butcher. So I have the great luxury of having a butcher nearby, the organic butcher of McLean here in Virginia, and they source everything from local farms in Virginia. They try to only have grass-fed or grass finished, I should say, and organically fed. Depending on what the animal is, and so you build a kind of trust with them, and they're very popular. They even opened another store in Maryland across the border. But I think you if you can, not everyone may have a butcher shop around the corner. It used to be that there were more butcher shops because there was more demand. So if you like you said, support the artisans, I'm sure there are butchers or farmers at the market that you love to go to, the farmers market. And if you support them, that kind of helps the whole system of smaller farmers. And this also, I'll say one more thing, it just gets back to this point, which I haven't mentioned, but is very much in my kind of raison d'etre, let's say, is the regenerative agriculture. We want just not even sustainable, we want it sustainable, but to regenerate the soil. And so if you can buy, that's why we talk about grass-fed. It's not only the nutrition, it's how the soil is treated and how the animals are treated, right? And how the people who are in that business are treated and able to make a life around this regenerative agriculture, as opposed to monocropping and industrial and all the sort of terrible things that go along with that, where the farmer is completely cut off from people, the human element, and it's all mechanized. So going to a local farmer or butcher at a market or a butcher shop really adds value, or you're putting in your participation into this beautiful cycle. And whereas going to the big box store, you're sort of stepping out of the more natural cycle and stepping into, the marketing, the corporate, which I think produces a subpar results.
Well, sure. And the animals are treated poorly, and the factory farming is responsible for a smaller sliver than we've been told, but it's responsible for the greenhouse problem on the earth. And when you use that term regenerative, you're talking about a proper farm, old school, where the cattle are grazing. They're actually sequestering carbon or doing a net positive for the environment. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that, or it's one of the big criticisms of factory-based animal farming, where they're just emitting and contributing to greenhouse gas problem. But it's possible to do it with an actual benefit to the earth rather than a check against it. And the big plant-based vegan community argument that we should stay away from these poor animals who are mistreated and causing global warming. We can turn the camera right over to the factory farming of agriculture of plants, which is doing the same thing, where they're rototilling and just blowing out the soil and emitting all kinds of emissions into the atmosphere around the same rate as animal production. Produce and plants are around the same, and they're reportedly, you could probably get someone to dispute it, but they're just a small fraction, and most of it is industry, right? Factories and coal plants and all that nasty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, really working on biodiversity of the soil. It just starts, it's cheesy to say, but from the ground up. It's really, if you start with a diverse land, biodiverse land, and people who can work that land without the tilling, and have the animals do the work that they're meant to do. And then we as the humans, we can sort of shepherd that, steward that. It just follows the proper, I think, the proper and natural life cycle. Whereas the monocropping, it's just, I feel like it leads to, yeah, we're cut off. We become cut off from our past, our traditions, the real farming that will be there for future generations. It cuts us off from our food cuisine traditions, our nutritional traditions of what we used to. People don't even know now. We're all conjecturing. Well, what did we used to eat? We're just cut off, and to continue on this sort of weird treadmill of factory and industrial processed, highly processed, refined foods and monocropping with the pesticides, etc. It's not the right road to be on. So I think to slow down and maybe also to not have such a scarcity mindset. Going back to what you're saying about, well, it's so expensive. I part of that might be fear, a lot of fear around, being able to feel satiated, because I think a lot of people who don't realize you can be satiated by a nice, small, fatty piece of meat, for example, or a nice, rich stew, which has a lot of collagen, like meat on the bone, like Dr. K talks about. If they haven't had that in a long time, they don't realize that actually you can be satiated by really nutritious, good, regeneratively raised foods. Because, I was in this position 2 years ago where I just lived from snack to snack and not enough, animal proteins and nutrients to feel satisfied. And, so then you kind of get fearful. You think, oh, well, I can't, I'm always hungry. And well, because you're under-nutrified, or whatever the word is, undernourished.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we can kind of get past that fear and feel like you won't need to be eating all day long and buying all these packaged foods. You can actually just really sit down and, I do a workout every day, and I eat mostly, for example, mostly beef, usually ground beef, or some sort of, steak or stew. And very
That's what I eat mostly, Tania.
Oh.
We haven't even checked up on this before.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Ground beef is the centerpiece, if I had to mention one food, centerpiece of my diet. And it has arguably more nutritional benefits than, let's say, a delicious steak, because the ground up is also including joint material and those great benefits of getting collagen that's hard to get in the diet. And I think you brought up an interesting point about fear, because fear sells a lot of snacks. And I'm thinking of the origination of the energy bar industry and product category. I was right on the ground floor of that back in the 80s. Power Bar was my first sponsor, and I was one of the first sponsored athletes by Power Bar, founded by a former marathon runner named Brian Maxwell, the late Brian Maxwell. And the whole brand story was how he ran out of energy during a marathon and lost the race because he became exhausted and needed more calories. And so it was programming the endurance athlete in particular at the start to have this convenient thing to reach for when you ran out of energy. And of course, that spread into all across culture, where people had power bars in their drawers or their briefcase for their travels, and they were never without that valuable source of energy, which arguably wouldn't be needed if you had a more nutrient-dense diet without the processed carbohydrate insulin roller coaster that causes those energy dips.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think that's a good point about the power bars, or not the power bars, but sort of these energy bars morphing into just snacks in general all over the place. Everyone wants to be healthy, but then we're hungry if we're undernourished, and so we reach for whatever's at arm's length. And as you said, yes, the high processed carb value. It's also highly palatable, which that's another point with, when you're eating only traditional foods, let's say only stew, or slow cooked things, or nothing fast, no fast foods. Your tastes, I think it's something physiological in the brain, taste buds, brain connection, but that you get used to lower sugar or less sugar, and you get used to the rich, beautiful flavors, and so you can't even eat a cheap or let's say not cheap, but a monocrop, rye from McDonald's that's been seed oils, or it's just not even. Oh, and on the other side, these, the snack foods and fast foods are highly palatable and easy to become addicted to. They're engineered to be this way, and it's just it's hard then, coming from that point of view, that perspective, to then change over and, ooh, you want me to eat, this squishy liver and that kind of thing. And we sort of lose sight of the fact that we're what we really need, and we're kind of driven by what the addict brain in ourselves is saying. Oh, we want this because that's the engineered. It's not because it's engineered that we want it, but it's highly palatable, and so we go for the easier stuff. It does take a little more effort to plan, right, and to cook, to make your own bone broth, or cook a stew all day. But there are now crock pots, and we have a lot of tools and utensils at our disposal to make it easier for ourselves to cook for ourselves. But I think probably harnessing our own ability to cook our own meals really is it's satisfying to eat, but it's also, it creates, you gain confidence, and then you see that fear as it's not effective. You don't feel as fearful when you're kind of more in control. So I think that's huge, when you can have confidence. I've grown up pretty much addicted to sugar, and it's only very recently that I've done what Kate Shanahan has always been saying to do, is to not snack. So I have my 3 meals, sometimes 2 even, but 3 meals a day, really nutrient dense, usually meat, usually, ground beef, and some fruit. But no snacking in between. And then I've gained confidence that, oh, I can make it through even with workouts, and, whatever the stresses of life are, and still be fine, and not need to lean on these crutches of these highly palatable snacks. Now and then, of course, there's a treat involved, of course.
A well-chosen treat. Well, listeners may not know how many health-related things you're into. You're just like the centerpiece go-to person, and one of your passions that's become a wonderful business are these skincare products inspired by your love for ancestral cooking and the natural, nutritious fats we talked about, especially tallow. Look what else is within arm's reach here on the video is your little tube of deodorant that you sent me from Bordeaux Kitchen. So if you're watching, a very cute little product with completely natural deodorant with natural scent. And I want to, before we go, just get a little bit into the idea of being more scrutinizing with what we put on our body as well as consume. We've talked about that a lot, but it's also
Sure.
our exposure to these chemicals and toxins and endocrine disruptors in all the skincare products and how you present an alternative and how this whole thing became a business for you, your inspiration to use tallow and things like that.
Yeah, well, I've been cooking so now on this trajectory for, let's say, 11, 12 years, trying to up my game for my daughters
Mhm.
and my own health. Um, and as I was going through this process of learning about, French cuisine in France, in Bordeaux, I realized that not only do the French, eat the nutrient dense um, animal foods, but they also cook with butter and the goose fat, and I've always been sort of interested in skincare because I always have dry skin, and prior to really understanding animal fats, I was using something from kind of like a homeo or biodynamic product from Germany that was a shea and beeswax mix. And I thought at some point I realized, wow, this tallow is so, particularly tallow is so, full of nutrients. Could I use it in a skin product? Could I put it on my skin? Because it's funny, a little side note is butchers will, when I did a butchery apprenticeship, and the butchers actually have very soft hands. They may be cut up a little bit, but they're always cold, but they're always working with fat.
Mm.
And so anyway, I tried melting some tallow into a little preparation and I realized, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And I saw on the internet, which is so easy to research, there were other people doing this. This was, like I said, about a decade ago. And I don't like spending a lot of money on basically on the marketing of big name skincare brands. And I don't trust their ingredients. If you can't understand, if you don't know what it's saying or what that long, long word is, it's probably not that natural. It's probably made in, factory and may not be that good, for your skin. And it turns out a lot of the parabens and other chemicals in skincare products are disrupt our hormones, and we absorb anything we put on our skin, right? Even the clothing. So that's a tough one, not wearing athletic wear is really tough these days. Finding all cotton, or natural materials is a challenge. But so we absorb the chemicals and they're everywhere, in the cleaners, um, the sprays, the little trees in the Uber car, or
Mm.
and that they disrupt our hormone system in insidious ways, and can cause weight gain and all sorts of disruption. And so I'd been pretty reticent to use these products. And I've tried to in the last decade to kind of formulate my own little creams. And so face creams or lip balm and the deodorant. I mean, let's say traditional deodorants made in a factory have often come with aluminum in them. And as we know, aluminum can, be absorbed into our bloodstream.
Mm.
Actually heating aluminum foil also, getting back to cuisine, is not a good idea. I
Mm.
would recommend, using no plastic, no foil, just glass or parchment, unbleached parchment paper if you can find it. And then for deodorant, you want to stay away from the aluminum. Um,
Aluminum would be antiperspirant, so a chemical that prevents the sweating. Deodorant is protecting against smell, but it doesn't necessarily have aluminum. But what we see in the deodorant category are on the ingredient list, all this stuff, including chemicals. And then I learned recently that the term natural fragrance,
mm,
which sounds like something natural, is a code word for chemicals. And they're allowed to say natural fragrance when they're putting in a chemical to make it smell minty or cherry or whatever flavor, whatever scent the deodorant is.
yeah, that's the sort of the trade secret part of the ingredients list is the natural fragrance. So, and I know a lot of people, especially very young kids, teenagers, are flocking to the Sephoras and all the fragrance stores. And those are very disruptive to the hormones, and they're just beginning life. They're just in puberty, and so what I try to use for my products, because my family uses them, my husband, my two teenage daughters, are mostly, essential oils and other oils besides the tallow that, that will be nourishing to the skin. But I use them in smaller proportions. I mean, tallow is the big cheese. And then but tallow is hard it's very solid at room temperature. So the products are usually at room temperature, right? So if they're too hard to get at, you can't apply them. So I kind of mix them with beeswax, which creates a nice layer on the skin, um, a protective layer to keep moisture in. And then also, some of these other oils, like you mentioned before, olive oil or things that we might have used traditionally. Our great, great, great ancestors who were, pressing olives, they would have used olive oil. So something to make it a little bit more applicable. You can also whip tallow, um, and make it a little fluffier so that it's easier to apply. So I've just, experimented over the last few years. And we moved back from Europe in 2019, and I started, I continued making the products, but then I decided I wanted to also make soaps and then go on Etsy to sell some of these, to share them with people, because I was kind of handing them out to family members, in Europe, and they loved it. So I just, now I've built a few customers who really appreciate the artisanal factor and also like to have these products.
Oh, I got them for Christmas stocking stuffers, and everyone loved them. They're nice
Yeah.
little beautiful gift bag that everything comes in. So how do people find the Bordeaux Kitchen skincare products?
So you can go to bordeauxkitchen.com, and then there's a link to the Etsy site, or you go on Etsy and write Bordeaux Kitchen, one word. Etsy, unfortunately, makes it a little hard to find artisans. I think when they began, they had good intentions, but now they're also quite corporate, unfortunately. But you can find the store, with a little bit of searching for Bordeaux Kitchen, you'll find me.
And the book is now, I believe, oh, what is that? What did you say? 6 or 7 years old. So it's in risk of going out of print, but you can still buy this wonderful masterpiece book. I can't recommend highly enough The Bordeaux Kitchen on Amazon or the other booksellers where you like to go. So I highly recommend grabbing that and thumbing through. You can open up to any page and learn something that's just so, mind blowing, and takes you into a journey into culture and fine dining and nutrition as well. I mean, you basically covered all those topics. My son was greatly inspired by that book and had a little miniature career in the culinary arts that lasted a few years, and he realized how beat up the people get in the kitchen. And I guess as a side note, when we were talking about seed oils, he had a couple jobs on the cooking line after watching all the cooking shows. Then he went to work, and somehow he landed this job at one of the finest restaurants in Los Angeles, run by a very prominent world famous chef. And he was shocked to walk in there and realize that they had these giant jugs of the cheapest
Mhm.
oil you can get that they were mixing in to make all of their sauces, dressings, toppings, and things. And he's cooking steaks up for $100, and the sauce is going on that's coming out of the plastic jug from Costco. And it was mind blowing to both of us to realize, like, yes, these oils are cheaper than the better ones, but when you're talking about the highest level restaurant, the expense or the difference in quality from going and getting a first cold press extra virgin olive oil from the farmer down the street versus buying the jug, I can't imagine that's a consideration when you have so much profit built into the final product. But it's done merely for convenience or habit or because nobody cares. So the work that you're doing, your life's work, is encouraging people to stand up,
thank you.
mention, ask some questions, shop on Etsy for your skincare products instead of at the CVS store or wherever you generally go to get these chemical laden skincare items, and just keep doing that good work, Tania.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks so much for having me and for being interested and supportive. It's really a pleasure to get to talk about these things with you.
Tania Teschke, everybody. Thanks for listening, watching.